One of the things we hear all the time from the right is that the left loves to play the victim and play the race card. And look, in some instances, I think that's a fair criticism. I think that's totally true. However, what they conveniently leave out is that they're even worse when it comes to this stuff. They act like they're so against identity politics, but then the second they feel like there's an opening, they play it more than anybody else. Just look at Trump right now. Trump he's already said, I'm going to narrow my search for a VP to only women. To only women. Why? He wants to shore up his support among, suburban women, and because he does poorly with them, and so he feels like, oh, hey, women, what if I give you a woman? There's a woman right here. See, I love women. I got a woman right here. So they do it all the time. But what you're about to see here is probably the lowest form of identity politics. Ted Cruz is talking to Maria Bartiromo, and they're trying to defend Clarence Thomas in the Supreme Court against charges of brazen corruption, charges where there's a mountain of evidence, by the way. So look at how they react.
Meanwhile, activists are all over the Supreme Court right now. Let me move on to this. 3 conservative Supreme Court justices are under investigation for ethics. They are attacking Clarence Thomas. Did Clarence Thomas do something wrong?
No, you know what Justice Thomas did wrong? He's been one of the greatest Supreme Court justices ever to serve on the court. He has been a principled constitutionalist, and the left despises him. Democrats hate Justice Thomas, and they save a special degree of hate for him because he's a black man.
The reason Democrats really hate Clarence Thomas is because he's black. That's why they hate him. Ted Cruz is such a slimy, shameless weasel. By the way, this is the guy who very clearly knew from internally leaked calls that we just got recently, he knew that the election wasn't stolen, the 2020 election, but he told Trump to his face, yeah, if you get this to the Supreme Court, I'll argue for your side. He knows it's false. He said he knows it's false, but he's like, yeah, I'll argue for it. Why not? Because he's a shameless partisan hack. This is the same stuff. He knows that's not true. He knows that they just put Ketanji Brown Jackson on the court. They hate her because she's black? No. Does race have anything to do with it when it comes to Clarence? Of course not. But he has no answer. This is how he deflects. Oh, they say Republicans are racist. Well, you're the real racist. The way you prove you're not racist is to not criticize the black conservative Supreme Court justice. Wow. Wow, it's so shameless. It's just astonishing to me. He could build a whole career on being this full of shit. By the way, Ted Cruz is also the guy who argued to the Supreme Court that the First Amendment protects corporations and billionaires buying politicians. He wanted to make our campaign finance laws even more lax. So his point was free speech means a billionaire gets to buy a politician. He knows that wasn't the meaning of the First Amendment. He knows that's not true, but he argued for that for partisan hack reasons and because he wants to keep the gravy train of corruption going. You're just looking at a dishonest guy. He's just dishonest.
You know what Justice Thomas did wrong? He's been one of the greatest Supreme Court justices ever to serve on the court. He has been a principled constitutionalist, and the left despises him. Democrats hate Justice Thomas, and they save a special degree of hate for him because he's a black man. And their view is an African-American is not allowed to be a conservative, is not allowed to disagree with left-wing orthodoxy. You know, Justice Antonin Scalia, whom I knew well, was every bit as conservative as Justice Thomas. Mm-hmm. The left didn't heap that kind of contempt on Justice Scalia. Justice Thomas they view as a traitor because he is African-American and he's an extraordinary justice.
How disgusting.
Not only did Justice Scalia get an equal amount of hate than Justice Thomas, he actually got more. You want to know why and how I know that? Because that's been my reaction. Why haven't I gone after Justice Thomas as much as Antonin Scalia? Because Antonin Scalia was one of the most vocal members of the Supreme Court. So we had more stuff to comb through. He would make an argument or a criticism in one of the cases. It would come out in the press. You'd read it and go, well, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And so you'd react to it. Justice Thomas is notorious for not speaking much on the bench. So that brings us to today. Why is he getting so much criticism? The answer is very simple. He's been incredibly corrupt. And there's incredibly detailed reporting on this front. There's been a ProPublica investigation. I think The Lever had some news on this stuff. Harlan Crow is basically his billionaire sugar daddy. He let Justice Thomas, spend time at his homes and let him use his jet and vacationed with him. And this guy has business in front of the court, and Justice Thomas doesn't recuse himself. Justice Thomas's wife was involved in the January 6th riots, and there was a case involving that in front of him. He didn't recuse himself. And then we also learned about Neil Gorsuch. He had a property on the market for like 2 years, and then you had somebody, this wealthy businessman with business in front of the Supreme Court, buy the property from Justice Gorsuch, and they act like, well, there's no problem here. They're not trying to buy influence. This isn't pay-to-play corruption. Of course it is. Now, look, the fact of the matter is the Supreme Court doesn't have a code of ethics. They don't have rules. They don't have laws that say, hey, you can't cross this line, you can't cross that line. It's just like a gentleman's agreement that will be ethical. But they're not ethical. Also, by the way, they're not objective. They're partisan hacks. They have their own biases, and they legislate accordingly. Same thing with Clarence Thomas. So when I criticize him, just like when I criticize Antonin Scalia, who I did more, it is absolutely substantive. In this instance, it's because they're corrupt, and it's obvious they're corrupt, and they're not recusing themselves when they need to recuse themselves. They also shouldn't be on the court at this point. But also, ideologically, I think they're wrong. The classic example I give all the time with Antonin Scalia is he would contradict himself on a regular basis. And Thomas does this exact same thing. So, for example, when there was a case from California about marijuana legalization, Scalia said, no, we don't believe in states' rights here. The supremacy clause of the Constitution means the federal government overrides the state government. So if the federal government has marijuana banned, California must abide. And then there was another case in Arizona about the border. They basically wanted to police their own border and not leave it up to the federal government. And Scalia chimed in and said, well, if Arizona can't police their own border, then they cease to even be a state. So of course states' rights overrides the federal government on this one. Total contradiction. One thing, no states' rights. The other thing, states' rights. It's all what his personal politics are, and he superimposed that onto the case. And so he would just cherry-pick the Constitution, interpret it however he wanted for his own political ideology. And Justice Thomas does the same thing. So not only are there substantive criticisms of them, in this instance, it's more than that. It's about look how immensely corrupt they are, and there's no accountability. And notice something. Ted Cruz didn't bring up anything about the specifics of the cases. Nothing. Nothing about the specifics of the criticism. Why? Because he has no answer. So what does he do? He hides and plays the race card. The only reason they're attacking him is because he's black and conservative. Man, Ted, wrap it up, dude. Wrap it up. He really is one of the most low-life politicians, and that's really saying something. Hey, y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop, and watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.